Hello and welcome to this month's episode of everyone's favorite public access show, Betwixt the Gavel. I'm still Andy Gavrin, Vice President of the Lower Merion Township Board of Commissioners. I'm really excited about this month's show as I get to nerd out a little bit and talk budgeting with our rock star of a Chief Financial Officer, Eric Traub. Eric, thanks for joining today.
Thanks, Andy, and for also making history and putting the phrase rock star and CFO in the same sentence.
Well, it's well earned. So Eric, let's start. Just tell us a little bit about yourself and your role here at the Township.
So as CFO, I oversee everything that's related to finance. So that's debt management, budgeting, financial management, cash management, collection of business taxes, alarm fees, sewer, solid waste fees, procurement, payroll, AP/AR. So it's a lot, but fortunately I have a team behind me that's experienced and really does a great job. But there is a lot to take care of. Lower Merion is not a little place, and there's a lot going on, so it's a lot to keep track of and keep in order.
Yeah, and as they say, every good rock star has a great band behind them, right?
That's true.
So
keep the analogies going.
There you go. We'll see if we can get that throughout the whole show. Not too many kids grow up saying, "Hey, when I grow up, I want to be Chief Financial Officer of a municipality." How did you end up in this role?
So I actually grew up in upstate New York, where I say we measure the snow in feet, not inches. So this area's winters are still pretty tropical for me. But I actually thought I wanted to be a teacher. I'm a history major. I watched a lot of documentaries, things of that nature. Really thought I wanted to do that. But the more I went through my undergrad experience, the more I soured a little bit on the idea of actually of teaching and was more looking into other options. So I actually went to grad school in Albany, New York. Albany is the state capital, and went there for a master's in public administration, which is basically like getting a MBA in government work. And I always had an interest in government and in politics and such, and really kind of gravitated towards public economics and finance when I was in Albany. Took a lot of classes on debt management, financial management, things of that nature. I actually worked for the New York State Division of Budget for a period of time, and then took a job down in the Philadelphia area, did consulting for a while across the country with different governments on financial matters, and then decided, to go back into local government, and have been for about 12 years now a finance director in Montgomery County, about 7 years here. And I really enjoy it because you actually get to see in local government, you get to see the impact of like the things that you do. When I was working in the state, you're basically like a piggy bank. You get the money and then you give it to this organization or that organization or this county to do the work. Here, you actually get to see the work, you do the projects, you get to see the result of like, oh, we borrowed debt to renovate this library. Now this library is open and it's better and hopefully more people enjoy it. So, that part is really nice about the job.
Yeah, that's great. And I see the same thing in my role where, being an elected official in a local government, you really have an impact on people's lives, and you can make a difference with what we do every Wednesday night. So it is really cool. Yeah. And I think this may be the first show where we have two New Yorkers on here. I probably shouldn't admit that, but that may hurt viewership, and I'm sure we'll get plenty of comments in. Yeah. So I'm glad they stole both of us in Pennsylvania. So going to our budget, you recently gave your mid-year budget kind of overview or projection. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, so it was really positive. I think on the screen the gents are going to be putting up a slide here that kind of shows overall where we stand. So we had a historically good 2021. Revenues were really off the charts. In 2022, we really expected a revenue drop, and we have seen that. But when you look at the numbers, we had budgeted a drop down to about 65 million, and right now where we're projecting is a little bit over 70 million, and that number still could go up. We'll see what the second half of the year brings. But we've really had a very strong revenue rebound post the beginning onset of the pandemic. Obviously, we had a very tough 2020 financially. We had our first significant deficit in many years, but we really rebounded strongly in 2021. And right now we're looking at about a $1.2 million deficit projected for this year. We tend to generally throughout the year get a little bit better than these projections, or if you look historically, at these mid-year projections, we tend to outperform them. So I'm hopeful that we could still outperform what's here. but I think it's a really good sign that we're at this point looking at a very small deficit for this year. And it really is a story of main two things is, business taxes have really rebounded and real estate transfer taxes have really rebounded. Anyone who goes on Redfin or Zillow and looks in their neighborhood in Lower Merion is probably going to be surprised by my house is worth X.
Yeah.
And, I've heard the saying, it's a great time to sell your house as long as you don't actually need to buy a house.
Where are you going to go?
Yeah. So, but we're seeing the benefit of that. The township receives half of 1% of the real estate transfer tax that happens on a property in Lower Merion. The school district also gets half of 1%, and the rest goes to the state. So both those jurisdictions have benefited from the rising value in real estate, and that's really helped us out. And business taxes, those are based on gross receipts, and those have been especially strong the last 2 years. So that really bodes hopefully well for the future for the township and its financial base.
Yeah, and that's great news, and hopefully even better news as the year closes out. And one thing you talked about, a couple of the revenue sources. So I think when most people think about the township's budget, they think property tax.
Yeah.
So what is our revenue, kind of at on a macro level, not getting into the detail,
Yeah.
but what does it look like? Where does our revenue come from as a township?
So the property tax is the big revenue source. You don't talk about it as much because it doesn't fluctuate so much. So it's basically a mathematical calculation of your assessed value times your millage rate. So that assessed value doesn't change too much because we don't necessarily have mandated reassessments. So there's natural assessment growth, somewhere in the neighborhood of half of 1% a year. But the property tax is also very stable in that Lower Merion taxpayers pay their tax bills. So, we collect about 98% of that. So, that's about, most years, about 40% of our general fund revenue base. The business taxes in total generally are about another 20%. The real estate transfer tax at about $5 to $6 million is another piece, and then the rest is really filled in by licenses, permits, fines, fees, things of that nature.
Okay, so what is our total budget?
Yep.
Where does that fall?
And asking in terms of revenues?
Yeah, in terms of.
So revenues were about 70 million.
Okay.
So, you're talking the main tax revenues are probably about 60% of that in terms of business taxes, real estate transfer taxes, and obviously the property taxes, which is over about 35 million of that.
Yeah.
So again, that's the big slice of the pie.
Gotcha. And you discussed that we have a slight budget deficit.
Yeah.
Is that something we should be worried about, that we have a deficit?
Generally not, because when you look at the fund balance, which on that slide you see the fund balance as a percentage of expenditures, that's a metric that a lot of people look at. As long as that metric is well above, I would say 20%, and we're above 30% right now, a small, modest deficit isn't going to really impact the township's financial position, its rating, or anything of that nature.
Gotcha. So from what you saw from this year's budget, you're pretty comfortable with where we sit financially.
Yeah,
as a township.
definitely right now. I think we're in a good position, and obviously it depends on what happens with the economy going forward, what decisions all the commissioners make as we go through the fall and the budget process, but we're in a good spot for right now.
That's great. So you talked a little bit about kind of updating the budget throughout the year. Can you take people through what is it? I know you don't sit there scribbling on the back of a napkin and then come to us and say, here's our budget of $70 million approximately. What does that process look like? Can you take us through it a little bit?
So it generally starts in June of each year. I, try to, kind of have fun sometimes with the budget process. I always send it out on a Friday, the kickoff memo to everyone to make sure they get their weekend,
Perfect.
the first Friday in June, off to a good start. But we work, so then the departments will work themselves with their staffs for about a month. And then right now, actually, the July-August period is when the finance department, the manager's office meet individually with every single department. We go through the budget in great detail. And we do that to try to make sure that departments have realistic goals that align with what we've been working on, goals that are aligned with what the commissioners have been talking about. Talk about their performance and performance measures. Are they improving? Are they not improving? Why aren't they improving? If it's an issue with what's going on right now with supply chain issues or being able to get supplies or parts, or what are the explanations for that. And then we talk a lot about, obviously, the numbers. So, there's lots of different ways. In my past experience, I dealt with different sort of kind of budgeting structures. So there's zero-based budgeting,
Yep.
There's, budgeting for outcomes, there's this, there's that. The bottom line is, as long as you're really critically analyzing your budget each year and trying to make sure that it's geared towards the end result, which is the priorities and objectives that are set out by the board, that's really what you were trying to do. So obviously we're trying to get the numbers as close as possible as to where they actually will come out. But there's a lot more than that, because the budget is a translation of what the community desires and values are. So we try to take that into account as we go through that process. And once we get to the fall, it kind of becomes much more of a public process with the board, getting their policy feedback, all building up into the last couple months of the year with the proposed budget and the public hearings and such.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great point. Like the budget, we look at the numbers, we analyze them, we study them, but really if you take a step back, there's so many things we'd love to do as a board for this township, but just like our personal budgets at home, you can't do everything, right?
Yeah.
And so how do we prioritize? And you have to look at the budget and manage it appropriately. And I think it is a great expression of what we can do as a township and where we prioritize. So I think that's a really good point that we can't forget.
Yeah.
So I know you're riveted right now and don't want us to take a break, but when the goons behind the camera tell me to stop talking, I have to stop talking. Don't worry though, we'll be right back with more budget talk with our CFO, Eric Traub. Told you we'd come back. Eric, let's just jump right back into some more budget talk. You right before the break, you were talking about in the fall how the commissioners start getting involved with the budget process. Can you take us through that schedule a little bit?
Yeah, so I'm sure you're going to see a schedule on your screen here which outlines. So in September, right after Labor Day, what does everyone want to do once school opens back up is, spend 3 to 4 hours having a budget workshop.
Absolutely.
So, that's the highlight of everyone's back to school week on the board. So that's really an opportunity for the board to have a first look at the budget, and there's going to be specific policy questions which have kind of come up to us, or maybe questions about new positions or anything of that nature, which the board really needs to weigh in on and give us direction in terms of a staff as to should this be in the proposed budget or not in the proposed budget. Then basically we take that back, work on that, rework numbers kind of through September. If there's anything we need to come back to the board on in October, we'll do that. All leading up to early November, we distribute the budget in the first week, and then on November 9th, the Finance Committee, that's normally one of the longer presentations that I give in the year, because that's kind of soup to nuts the entire proposed budget, talk about the proposed CIP, capital improvement program and such. And then it really gets into the public process. So the commissioners are going to start obviously voicing their opinions, and the public's going to have their chance to two public hearings, November 16th and December 7th. And that's where the public can come out, they can comment, they can write comments in email, attend via Zoom, all the different means that now we have for public comment, all leading up to really the grand finale of budget season, which is the final meeting of the year, December 21st this year, the final board meeting of the year, where hopefully we'll have an adopted budget, or else we have to have another meeting before the end of the year to adopt the budget. So,
just out of curiosity, from your knowledge, have we ever not adopted a budget at the December 21st meeting?
Not in my experience. I've heard not of this municipality, but of definitely other places that have had, post-Christmas meetings because they haven't had a resolution on an issue. Because legally, with a calendar year being the fiscal year, you have to have an adopted budget when you move into that period.
Well, I'm very hopeful, and I think one thing we did to help that out in I think it was in June, we had a priorities workshop. Maybe it was in May with the township, and it was something President Sinai had instituted, which I thought was a really great idea. So that in past years, when commissioners have new priorities or new things they want to throw into the budget, it often comes up in those September, October, November meetings, sometimes in December meetings. Yeah. This year we really went through early and kind of circulated from all of the committees, here are the priorities for each committee. The commissioners each went and ranked those priorities, and we're going through right now saying here are the top priorities to give you that insight now. Hopefully we don't have any December 29th meetings.
Yeah, the earlier that we know about things from a staff perspective, the easier it is for us to incorporate those things into the budget that you guys receive.
Yeah, and I think it's also better government as well, because it allows us to have a full discussion and debate over things rather than at 11:30 at night on December 21st when everyone's trying to get this budget passed and somebody introduces something quickly. That's not good government. So we talked a lot on the revenue side before the break on the budget. We didn't really talk much about the expenses. Can you give us an overview? What are those big items that are included in the budget? Is it police? Is it paving? Is it Ferraris for all the commissioners? What are those items?
If Andy has a Ferrari, he's buying it himself. But if Andy or anyone else is buying a Ferrari, I would appreciate if you'd buy it at the Ferrari dealership in Rosemont on Lancaster Avenue, because that'll help out the gross receipts of that business and help out the business tax gross receipts. But in general, public safety really leads the way, and that's not a surprise anywhere where you have a local police force. So about 43% of our general fund expenditures are police and fire, the vast majority of that police, because we're fortunate to have active volunteer fire companies, which really reduce the overall cost of the township of the fire service. Debt service, so when you're talking about paving, that really comes through our CIP program. How the general fund pays for that is it pays back the debt service over time. That's about 13%, and that's been declining. That was, I think, 17 to 18% when I first got here, about 7 years ago. Public Works, overall, about 13% of the general fund budget. Parks and Recs and Libraries, about another 13%, split pretty evenly. And then the rest is really building and planning, 6 to 7%. And then the rest is really what we call kind of the general government expenses. So it's like finance, IT, HR, the manager's office, parking, things of that nature. But public safety, is really what leads the way, and it makes sense from a perspective of they're operating 24/7, whereas clearly I'm not, at my desk at 2 to 4 a.m.
I don't know. I've gotten some emails from you in the middle of the night. So
you may have.
But I think it also aligns with our priorities, right? Keeping Lower Merion safe is our number one priority. So it absolutely makes sense that public safety is our number one budget item. So you've dropped a couple of, I don't know, breadcrumbs, Easter eggs, kind of, foreshadowing. You've mentioned the CIP a couple times. Mm-hmm. So we've been talking about our general operating budget. That's not the only budget that this township has. Can you tell us about the CIP and some of our other budgets?
Yeah, so, we have various funds, and funds are basically another set of books that you keep for the township. So the general fund is basically where everything else that isn't in another fund goes. The sewer fund. So really what that is all the operations related to the sewer system. And what the board really hears about on that, and really in the spring each year, is the sewer rate. So the rate actually hasn't been increased since 2012. Very fortunate in that regard. The rate is on a consumption basis. Among governments in this area, on a consumption basis, it's the lowest one that's around in this area. Another fund is the solid waste or trash fund. So obviously everyone wants their trash and recycling picked up, and it costs money and has people and very expensive trucks to do that. So that fund operates basically as a separate enterprise, taking into account all the expenses associated with trash and recycling collection. Those fees, we went through a process, and you were intimately involved in that. We restructured those in 2021. Then, we have lots of different equipment. So the equipment fund, that really pays for all our vehicles, large equipment such as some of our larger mowers and things of that nature, compost turners, leaf turners, all sorts of things you wouldn't necessarily think of, but it all goes into the government's operations. And then the capital projects fund, which is really where all the dollars come from to whether it's rebuilding a park, paving the roads. We've been talking about rebuilding the Ardmore Avenue Community Center, and that's a big project that's on the horizon over the next couple of years. And then finally, we have a smattering of multiple special revenue funds. The ones that the board talks about the most is really the one involving CDBG, Community Development Block Grant funding, that the township gets in certain areas, and around about $800,000 to $900,000 a year. And then there are some other funds in there, including our new American Rescue Plan Fund, which we set up to basically receive those federal dollars, and then the board's gone through a process to allocate a piece of that right now and is going through a process to allocate the rest of it throughout the rest of this year.
Gotcha. That's a great overview. Thank you. And I think hopefully our viewers' heads aren't spinning. Hopefully yours isn't, because you need to keep track of all this. You and your team. There's a lot there.
Yes.
So with the ARP, you mentioned the ARP funds. So how does that? We got $25 million approximately from the federal government. Do we just put that into our budget, or how does that work?
So there's rules and regulations about how you use those ARP funds. So I'm fortunate enough that I've gotten to sit on countless webinars about that, especially as the rules first came out, and then the rules changed, and then there was an interim rule, and then there was a final rule, and then there was an update, and then there was an addendum.
Sounds like the federal government.
So it's been an interesting process. Because it's this one-time, it's a large cash infusion into local governments across the country. But all the money has to be spent within about a 4-year period of time. It has to be obligated, or you basically have to decide how you spend it by the end of 2024. It has to be spent by the end of 2026. So we were talking about the community center. The board did authorize about $9 million almost of the ARP dollars to fund the eventual construction of that. So that's a project that qualifies. All the projects that the board brings forward, we're going to review internally from a staff perspective, make sure they qualify under the various rules and regulations of the ARP program. But it is something for us to obviously keep our eye on, and I'm sure the board is going to be having a vigorous discussion as we go through the fall about the next allocation of dollars and where the township decides those dollars are best spent. Yeah,
and I think bringing that up, the Ardmore Community Center, is it also shows a good point about our CIP, our Capital Improvement Program, which is we have a 5-year CIP, but it's only 1 year budget and the rest is a plan. So people had said, oh, this was in your budget anyway, and it really wasn't. The budget is only for the current year.
It's in your plan.
It's in our plan.
It's not in your budget.
Yes.
So there's no legal means of which you've guaranteed you're going to do something that's in year 2 or 3 of the CIP. When you adopt a budget, you're adopting appropriations, and that's your plan, and that's really more set in stone. What things can change, and we've seen things change a lot in the last 3 years. So, it's a plan, and plans change, as we know.
Of course. So my electric ankle bracelet that the goons at Lower Merion TV put on me is buzzing very heavily and shocking me. So I know we have to go. But one last request before we run out of time: is there any sneak peeks of the fall that other people don't know that our viewers can maybe get a tidbit?
I don't think I can really give you that. I mean, our goal is really, from our perspective, we want to deliver a budget which really meshes with the priorities and objectives that the board sets out. And that's your guys' choice. I say I don't have, obviously everyone has policy preferences them individually, but my policy preferences don't go into the budget. It's a document that we set up to try to mesh with what the board has told us, this is what we want, and then when we deliver it to you, you tell us this is what we want, or mostly what we want, and strike and change X, Y, and Z, and that's what we do. So, hopefully that's the goal, is that it's something that meets the board's expectations and the board can use to try to deliver for the community.
Well, I'm disappointed that you don't have any secrets for our viewers, but I guess discretion and professionalism is part of what makes you a great CFO.
They'll have to stay tuned to LMTV to see.
I guess they will. So sadly, yet another episode is in our rearview mirror. Thank you, Eric, for all the insights. I'm looking forward to our budget discussions this fall, and really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Andy.